I'd like to introduce one of the founders of Supplemental Action, James Clark.
Thank you, sir. Feedback, sorry. So yeah, you'll hear a lot from us for the next 40 minutes or so, but we're starting out with something I hope you'll find entertaining, which is a little video. Hey Brian, check this out.
That video. Goldfish have an attention span longer than us.
8 seconds. We'll keep that in mind today.
Yeah. So we have all these local businesses in the audience. What do you think is the biggest takeaway from that video?
For me, it's that. To me, what you see in that video, and it really just reflects the way we all live our lives, and the reason that I think it's really exciting and interesting is you can self-validate this proposition. This is how we interact with each other, with our families, with our friends, with media, with businesses. If you're not addressing the fact that this is how people consume their lives, you're doing yourselves a huge disservice.
Why do you think this is the case?
One visual example I like is this one. It's a very simple one. A lot of businesses have websites that were designed for these things and might work okay with these things, but this is how we use our phones. And if you haven't built a website that's specifically designed for the fact that we operate our phones this way, it's going to be very, very difficult for anybody to actually find you on their phone, where more than half of all usage is. But it's actually even worse than that. No matter how good your products or services are, or how well known your business is, if someone wants to interact with a business, the place they're almost inevitably going to start is a Google page. They're going to search for something, and if they don't find that business, and you'll see very specific examples of all of these things later, if they don't find that business at all, trouble. If that business can't be found and interacted with on social media, more trouble. In today's world, it's just an expectation that people, brands, products, companies are available for a conversation. We showed the phone example. One of the most lethal ones is if a business is found on Google but has no Yelp reviews or negative Yelp reviews or other reviews like that have not been addressed, that's a wonderful disincentive for a consumer to use that business. And if you don't find out something to do with that stuff and you don't address it pretty well, I think you're going to have problems.
Sure. Well, I mean, I spent some time talking with some of you upstairs. It seemed like that would be a pretty big burden, I guess.
I think it's a huge burden. And, Tom mentioned we named our company Supplemental Oxygen. We've developed over the years of doing this type of business a metaphor that I'll talk a little bit about later without trying to bore you too much of a Sherpa, of helping companies get up what can seem like a really daunting and challenging mountain. It can seem like an impossibility. It can seem like a real struggle for a business to even understand where to start. There are so many different facets to this. Just the basic question of how a business does or does not appear on the first page of Google involves at least 4 or 5 completely different technological approaches. And the intellectual property behind Google's algorithm is considered by many to be the most highly protected asset in the business world today. It has inspired a whole industry of sort of Kremlinology, of people reading through the tea leaves of how does that algorithm work. Nobody really knows, even though we constantly study it. The Facebook algorithm is the same way. If your business puts a post on Facebook and you want to know, is it going to show up in your feed or not? It changes every quarter. They don't tell us how it changes. It's incredibly difficult. How many folks out there have BlackBerries? Come on, Mike. All right, we got one. We had 3 people in the last session. 4 years ago-ish, BlackBerry was the dominant smartphone platform. Now it has less than 2% market share and is poised for probable liquidation, although Mike's, yours will continue working. Of course, because it's Mike. Google Plus is a great example. We'll talk a little bit more about that. Google Plus was launched by Google about 5 years ago. It was viewed by the industry as an attempt to compete with Facebook in the then emerging social media space. In that context, it was a failure. After a year and a half or so, it didn't approach Facebook's audience numbers, and the industry press wrote it off and said, oh, this thing doesn't matter, it's a failure, it's a laughingstock. All the while, what Google had done was make Google Plus the single most important thing in the world for any business who actually wants to show up on the first page of a Google result. And most of us missed it. Now you'll hear later about how Google Plus is the place you have to start if you want your business to be found by consumers. But a week ago, the guy who created it, championed it, and led the team that built Google Plus resigned. And now there's a whole bunch of industry press suggesting that they're going to fold the whole engineering team into Android, that they're going to sunset it or redesign it or replace it. We don't know. And you'll see shortly that it's a really important thing for all of us. What it really boils down to is another way to think about this sort of Everest mountain metaphor is that the climate of digital marketing services is constantly changing. And it's changing in a way that nobody understands. It's changing in a way that if you don't address it properly, while you're not going to die climbing that mountain like unfortunately some real Sherpas did recently, which is why I'm not going to make as much of that metaphor as I sometimes do. But as you saw on the previous slide, it can be lethal for your business. And because I know you guys have to go back and run businesses for the rest of the day, I can't imagine that spending time trying to figure out all the immense complications of this and how it's going to change is something that you have time for.
Yeah.
So that makes it hard.